Reading 72 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice Nicoll, Volume 2. Quermir Dugley, April 21st, 1945. Further note on the work idea of yes and no. A question was asked at one of the groups after the last paper had been read. If one had memory of the swing of the pendulum, and of one's thoughts and feelings of the opposite, would one be less identified? To this question, I would say, why certainly, this is the whole point. The paper made it clear that we remember only on one side or the other, not both together. It was said, for example, that when we are negative, we tend to remember only unpleasant things, and vice versa. Everyone must see how he swings between opposites in the intellectual center and in the emotional center, and also in the instinctive center. What have you done today, all of you? Have any of you done any work on yourselves? Have you taken in impressions of one another from a negative swing and not attempted to remember opposite kinds of impressions that you may have had at other times? Remember, you must bring the opposites together consciously. For this, you must have a work memory, a new memory, arising through self-observation. Do not get confused by these terms, pendulum and opposites. Do you not think that you already know, in a way, that everything swings to and fro inside one, between hope and despair, between liking and disliking, between feeling cheerful and feeling depressed, between thinking that something is true and thinking that it is not true? All these are pendulum swings between two opposites, going in different directions all the time, all with their different times, like different kinds of clocks. You will think it very strange when you are told there has to be one clock eventually instead of these many hundreds of clocks, all keeping different times. Now, every thought or feeling that comes into your consciousness has an opposite. When you identify with the thought or the feeling, you are under its power and are on the pendulum, and insensibly, without your knowing how or even remembering, you will find yourself having the opposite thought or opposite feeling without seeing any contradiction. This is just where our unconsciousness lies, our living state of sleep in which we do not see our contradictions. Mr. O once said that when the pendulum is swinging down, it is going fastest. When it passes the middle point, and then as it rises on the other side, it goes slower and slower until it reverses its movement. He said, we are not quick enough to feel this movement because we work with too slow a hydrogen, and so we are conscious, in the ordinary sense, at the two opposite ends. Now it is very wonderful when you begin to understand that you need not go with your mechanically arising thoughts and feelings, and you have heard this many times from me before, but I am sure that a great number of you do not understand what it means practically. We must, it was once said, learn to rule our minds. And we were told that this takes a very long time and a great deal of work and observation. I fancy that some of us, on first hearing this, did not imagine for a moment that it applied to ourselves. No doubt, we thought that we ruled our minds absolutely. However, when a man begins to observe himself and becomes interested in his self-observation, he very soon realizes, of course, that he rules nothing within the psychological world of himself. In this invisible world in which each one of us lives, we control nothing. Our thoughts come to us, we know not how. Sometimes they come in swarms, and the strange thing is that we take them as our own thoughts and play them on our own piano, as it were, as if they were true. I do not know how to describe this taking of thoughts as one's own, just as I cannot describe the miracle of realizing that they are not oneself and they need not be made one's own, that one need not believe them, that one need not go with them, that one need not take them as true, and finally, that any thought of any kind can come to us at any moment. And of course, in the latter case, if you are not awake, just notice what being awake means. Then this thought will convince you. It will be your way of thinking for that moment. And this is just exactly what we have to separate from through non-identifying almost continually. There is a phrase, a person is listening to his thoughts. This is a very good phrase, but I do not think it is true. I would like you to discuss this. I would rather say that we do not listen to our thoughts, but we are them. Perhaps when we get rather horrified at what we are thinking, we may stop. But as a rule, these thoughts come in by themselves and play our piano, and we think it is ourselves playing, that it is our music. The whole position has to be reversed. To be like that is just to be a machine in which the mind rules us and the thoughts make us think them. You have a thought, oh, how tired I am, or how hard my life is, or something like that. Have you got sufficient inner observation? Have you cleared and well dug a big space in your mind through the practice of inner attention and put a hedge round it and a gate so that you can hear the click of the gate and watch this darling little thought coming up the drive all ready to say, oh, how tired I am, etc. I fancy that once we let it in very far, every thought gets hold of us and wrings us, takes our blood, makes us react, talk, behave in a certain way, and then, satisfied with having dined off us, it retires for a time. Now, to return to the pendulum, you will not be able to bring opposite thoughts and feelings together consciously unless you have some distinct memories of them recorded in your work memory, as I call it. That is the new memory that arises in us all when we begin to practice a life of self-observation, when we begin to live more consciously, not only with other people, but when we are alone with ourselves. Can you remember that you appreciate some things in a person, and have often done so, when you are negative with that person and can only mechanically remember negative things? The bringing of these two psychic acts together, these two memories, is working, not between yes or no, but between yes and no. If one does this gradually, one does not swing so far in either liking or disliking, knowing how treacherous the country is beyond and how asleep one is if one gets into it. This not going very far one way or the other requires inner awareness and a certain inner alertness. It makes everything much more intense. One sees what one has to do. It is not to be confused with indifference. Conscious restraining of the pendulum is utterly different from a state of indifference. One is conscious, the other mechanical. There are many parables and images about this scattered through esoteric literature, such as driving two powerful horses, black and white, and restraining them in the right proportion, and many other images. Now, if you do not go with the thought, you are free from it for the time being. The force that might have gone into it does not go into it. In what direction should the force go? It is often said that self-observation should always eventually be carried out in connection with self-remembering. In fact, self-remembering is really taught first in the work. The point is that the force that you withdraw from one or the other side of the opposites should pass in the direction of real I. We attempt to remember ourselves because we have no real I. Now, no one can get to an experience of real I, save in an illegitimate way by drugs, for which he has to pay afterwards, without a certain emotional state, which I will simply call evaluation of the work. When a person works without any real individual feeling, without any sense of wonder, that person's work will be on too low a level. That is to say, it will be in too small eyes, in small parts of centers. Naturally enough, these cannot make contact with higher centers or real I. So if a person works on such a level, only there will be nothing real. And nothing new will enter the understanding, because the force that has been gained from non-identifying with inner states has nowhere to go to, and so may, as it were, flood back. I have often told you that you cannot, as far as I know, remember yourselves unless you have a sense of something greater. For instance, if you do not believe in greater mind, you cannot raise yourself emotionally to all the conceptions of the work, which concern the conscious circle of humanity, the level of awakening, the level of objective consciousness, the attainment of real I. Nor will such great diagrams as the ray of creation and many others mean anything to you at all. It is very unfortunate when a person is in this state. Sometimes it arises because a person has not perhaps sufficient background, has not perhaps read and thought enough about the struggle of esoteric teaching with mechanical humanity. But this belongs to another conversation about valuation and what is most important to us. That is, what we value most, which we do not notice and do not suspect